2, 1, go.
Why do you sound out of breath?
Because I stood up. A lot of work these days.
You need to play more basketball.
All I could do is just go out front and dribble. It's kind of pathetic.
Aww.
I look at my cameras on my house to look at my form and stuff. I'm like, oh man, I'm terrible.
Better than I can do. I'm a wrestler. So.
All right, in this video, we are going to be looking at the ratatouille of book writing. And remember, anyone can write.
I cannot. I can correct.
Welcome to the CodeX Cantina, where I am Una.
And I'm going to steal your soul crypto.
Now, this is interesting book novella to me because we frequently say books can be windows, doors, or mirrors to yourselves and others. This is interesting because this one, I would say, is argue both a mirror, where you can see yourself, particularly if you're a writer, and kind of relate to a lot of things. And it's also a window where it allows you to look out at the writer lifestyle and kind of get their idea of what it's like to be a writer, I feel like.
Yeah, and at the end of this story, he gives his notes for the whole book, If It Bleeds, and he talks about how he wanted to give insight to what the writing process was like. And he said that so many people always ask me, oh, how did you get the inspiration for that story? And in this one, it's really funny because he says he doesn't know where he got it from. And he said, that's the honest truth. And you may not believe me. And of course...
Well, we know he wasn't writing about his own life because Drew's story is only 300 pages. And if this were Stephen King writing it, it would well have been over 1,000 pages, right?
It's probably 2,000. 2,000. And Stephen King is one of the most prolific writers of our time and is known to, just crush out so many books and novellas and stories so often. So he has the complete opposite problem of our buddy Drew, as we're going to see.
So I liked this story, but I would argue that this is less of a character piece than the first two. If you're just watching this video and you're curious, what do I mean the first two? We had to skip the third one because Crypto and I are working through the Outsider TV show right now. We just wanted to see that before we started the third one. So we're actually reading this 1, 2, and 4. If there's a gap in our knowledge in 3, it's because we haven't read it. But I would argue this is less of a character piece and more of like an allegory for writing.
Yeah, this is pulling the curtain behind what potentially a lot of people that are aspiring writers may experience.
Now, you were doing the audiobook of this, so I wanted to ask real quick. There's parts of this where we go into his script that he's actually writing, the Wild, Wild West and such. And in the written text, it's like a different font, the margin is different. How did that play out in the audiobook?
So it's actually really neat in the audiobook, and here's another one of the reasons I really enjoy audio over actual books sometimes, is the narrator changes his voice to be kind of wild, wild westy, if that makes sense. And there's sound effects, and there's no music or anything, but they definitely have more... it's embellished when he is talking about the actual... Bitter River than when it is talking about Drew's story itself, which is kind of nice. So it adds an element, a layer in there to kind of engross you into that story. And actually, at one point in time, because of that, was almost more interested in Bitter River and what was happening with the sheriff and all that and those characters than I was in Drew. And I kept thinking, I want Bitter River, man. I want that book.
All right, let's jump into plot recap.
So this is a pretty simple story. We have Drew Larson, who is a teacher and a part-time writer, and throughout his life, he has struggled with finishing full novels. He's written a couple successful short stories, and one day, walking down the street, he finally has an epiphany of this story that he's going to write, a Western called Bitter River, and it's all mapped out in his head, and he knows this is the one, this is the time that he's going to finally be successful. So what he does is he goes to his old department head, Al, and he goes to his wife and pitches them this idea and convinces them to support him in going up to his dead dad's cabin and writing this story. All right, so as he goes up to his cabin, he meets an old person there and shakes his hand. This will be relevant later in a second. And as he gets up there, he kind of gets things going. He starts typing. He's banging out like 10, 12 pages a day. If there's a nor'easter that comes in and traps him there, and while he's trapped there, he gets sick from the handshake, and this kind of makes him start going a little delirious, and it slows down his writing process. As the storm ravages around, it knocks over a shed, and there is a dying rat that he saves, and then he makes a deal with this rat because he can't finish the book to help him finish the book. So it like grants him a wish, but there's a catch. Somebody that is close to him is going to die. And he says, well, I'm not going to sacrifice my family. And they're like, no, how about, old department head Al? He's dying of, cancer anyway. And he's like, okay. So he finishes the book, and everything seems hunky-dory. He sells the book, everything's great. And then Al and his wife are tragically killed in a car accident, and Drew is devastated by this. And he just decides, I'm not going to write anymore, and I'm going to become a better father and, a better husband. End story.
Okay, you'll have to point to me where he said he's going to be a better father and husband. But let's jump into the analysis, because I don't think we had the same takeaway from the story. I agree about the love letter to writing. If you've never seen On Writing or read On Writing by Stephen King, I'm going to recommend it to you half-heartedly, because I actually have never finished it. I just got pulled away and never finished it. But a lot of what happens in the story, I haven't read the afterword, just kind of reminding me of the writing process in here in general. Now, as we said earlier, this kind of recreates that process, I feel like, for the average person. And at one point, Crypto asked me, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm 20 pages in, and the only thing that's happened is he's planning to write a damn story. Like, nothing's happened."
It's a very slow burn, I will give you that.
Well, let me point out some things here that are in the beginning that are very meta. And that's when the story starts out, they start talking about a record skipping, aka starting and stopping, starting and stopping, starting and stopping. And his first, one of his first hits, one of his first short stories was called Skip Jack, based on that. And you'll notice that he's trying to start this story process, but he keeps kind of getting reset and not being able to actually start. When the inspiration hits him, did you notice that the walk sign happens, and what does he do? He takes no action.
Says don't walk.
He literally stands there and misses the walk. So again, more symbolism of failing to start, procrastinating and stuff like that. And then what's interesting is there's this quote that I wrote down here where he even kind of writes this concept into the prose itself. He had a lot of fun with the writing of this one, I could tell. Once you began, however, that changed. Every scene you wrote, every word you wrote, limited your options a little more. Eventually, you were like a cow, trotting down a narrow chute with no exit, trotting towards the... And then the sentence kind of stops too, just like a writing process where you just kind of cut yourself off. So we have constant failure to take action.
Yeah, it's very self-aware, the story.
Yeah, and then you'll notice when he gets to the cabin, he calls his wife, he looks at some old books. Before he even went to the cabin, they're like, let's wait for a week. Let's just make sure that it's real. So there's tons of procrastination, which I think is a very meta, fun way to kind of... I think a lot of writers can relate to that, where they want to start a story. Oh, I've got this great idea, but they don't take the time to put pen to paper, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that this story is so much about the procrastination of Drew writing the story, when I've seen in a lot of lectures, or have been told, myself by people, when they mention about writing, that the number one thing about writing is distractions. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to get himself away the distractions of kids and work and life to do this, but he's procrastinating that, mainly probably because of fear. And I'm sure a lot of people, think that as well, as they're thinking of taking on a huge undertaking of writing a novel. It's a scary process.
If I remember correctly from the On Writing book, I think he even wrote about his schedule, if I recall correctly, where, literally he'll have a schedule where he sits down and he won't leave and has a specific page count or word count that he has to hit. And it's part of that ritual of how he's become prolific that's worked for him. It may not work for others, but that's something that's gotten him through those challenges.
Yeah. And I really liked how he unfolded the ritualization of the writing process, that I have to have the 2 cups of coffee, and I have to do this, and I have to do this. And that is very ingrained into, I think, most people, as we can relate to that, whether you're a musician or a sports star or an actor or whatever job you have. I know that, as a teacher, my thing is always, my go-to thing that I say before every single class is good morning, and I have a little spiel that I do, the exact same words every single time, every single day, and that sets my brain into motion. Yeah. And I think that that's kind of cool, as you can see yourself in this story.
Now, he's made a lot of other writing references through this. We got a bunch to kind of talk about here, but he made a reference to tons of authors. We have James Joyce, Jonathan Franzen, Flannery O'Connor. There's tons more, but we just did that video on James Joyce, and what was the number one issue that he was kind of highlighting in Dubliners? Paralysis.
Oh, paralysis. I didn't mean to be funny there. I froze. Paralysis, duh.
So it's interesting. I'm curious if he did that nod on purpose, picking this author that had a big commentary, a whole book of short stories on characters being paralyzed by inaction, in the midst of this character that is paralyzed by inaction in this plot.
Yeah. Well, I felt like he was kind of poking fun too, because at one point he said, there was a time when Joyce wrote 7 words, and he's like, "Hey, that's good for you, Joyce." He goes, "Yeah, but I don't know what order they're in." I actually laughed out loud at that. That was funny.
Well, that's an actual quote from Joyce when he was writing Ulysses.
Yeah. It's funny. It's good.
Yeah. And there's just tons of things that he did throughout this. Like he said, the wind gusted and the lights flickered again. Or maybe they stuttered. Like, he just had fun with the prose, even trying to make selections that maybe he went through those selections as he was, like, writing this piece. The fact that he brought it out in the prose was really interesting, too.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think this is going to get to your point kind of at what cost. And he kind of writes himself into the story with the cold, with the Dr. King's medicine. So who are you going to call to...
Yeah, that was funny.
Like, who are you going to call to fix your sneezels when you're sick? Dr. King. Yeah. But
yeah, that was funny.
But he was constantly presented with the idea of what would you trade in to make this novel? Would you trade in, time with your family? Would you trade in the life of your family? And I think that kind of speaks to writing, but also crafts in general, artists, creative endeavors particularly, those that are striving to make their big hit and to make it to the next step. What are the deals that they would do to do that? And that brings us to what I felt like was a really big story parallel here, which was, if you haven't read The Monkey's Paw, they make a reference to it in this story. They make a reference to several stories in this, including the Dr. Faustus story that Monkey's Paw kind of came from. But it's the deal with the devil idea that you offer something to the devil, and in return, what you were promised is kind of not exactly what you're going to get. You kind of get screwed over, like a flip deal. If you've seen the movie Bedazzled, that's a whole movie dedicated to the Faustian screw-over deal, if you will.
Yeah, that's what I felt too. This was definitely the Faustian deal, and I think that I think King nailed it, and I think that it was what is the value of an old person's life versus a young person's life.
Well, see, and I feel like that's where we're going to disagree a lot. But let me step through one point here real quick. Some people may be curious about why does the rat have little tiny human hands? And if you've read The Monkey's Paw, it's a reference to that where it's literally the monkey's hand that it kind of goes through. Maybe we'll go through that story here at one point, but I did want to call that out, that if people are confused as to why the tiny hand, it is a direct reference to that story.
All right, so I have a quote here from the story. It says, "If I may slightly change an old punchline, you knew I was a rat when you took me in." And it's in the nature of like a rat to betray. And so this goes back to the idea of the frog and the scorpion, the story of that the frog said, "Hey, I'll help you across, get on my back." And they go across the water. And at the very end, they're almost there. The scorpion stings the frog. And he's like, "Why? You've doomed us both. We're both going to die." He's like, "You knew I was a scorpion." Like, bad things are going to happen.
It's in my nature.
And Drew... Yeah, but Drew didn't care, and that's the kind of the point of the story is some people don't care what it takes to be successful.
No, I think the frog and the scorpion parable tied it in pretty well. And in terms of the other book themes, now again, we haven't read 3, so we can't comment on whether these are in 3, but 100% death has been in all 3 of these. Right? In this story, we have the death of the father, the caretaker, the gas station dad's attendant, the impending death that the moose kind of threatened. You have even language where he says, "Drew grabbed the remote and killed the set for turning off the TV." So death, obviously, a huge scene with Stephen King in general. Technology. The inspiration hits...
Anti-technology.
The inspiration for the story came when he decided to not take the car and walk to the store, right?
And the story's a Western, so set 150 years ago.
Story's a Western, and in order to be productive, he had to go to a cabin away from technology and distractions, with the exception of 200 channels of direct TV. And there was a couple of anti-Trump political statements in there. I don't know. Some people,
as always,
some people may have issues with that. I don't know, but you just kind of have to come. It seems like in early Stephen King days, did you notice it was like almost always church comments, or the evil person was a big church goer?
Yeah, he's got to have something to poke a button at, I feel like.
Older age, like if we go to, our Wendy's button box breakdown, I don't know, is this like a new thing? Like, at what point did he switch from always harping on religion, or organized religion, to always harping on politics? Like, I wonder when that switch happened for him.
I don't know if the switch happened. I know we're a little bit off topic here, but I think it's interesting that you point that out, because I felt that he didn't just necessarily switch. I think he sectioned it off. So instead of being 90% anti-religion or anti-whatever in his books and maybe a little bit political, I feel like he's evened it out, because in the audio version, the guy that does the sign when it says, you will be prosecuted, blah, 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 God bless America. There was some heavy emphasis on that. And I don't know if that came through in the written version, but in the audio version, it felt like he was kind of poking fun at, people that live out in the wilderness of worshiping a god. I felt that. I was like, that's interesting how they did that.
Okay. It was all capital in the written word, but I didn't get as strong. It was there, but I didn't have as strong as a takeaway, it sounds like, as you did.
Oh, yeah. In the audio, it's God bless America. He does something like that. It's crazy. It's like, it's almost obnoxious.
All right, so now let's go to the super subjective side of things. That's kind of the analysis about, Monkey's Paw, the writing analysis and stuff like that. You said a couple times now that you thought he really hit it home, nailed it. Now, for me, what he nailed was his own finger when he was aiming for the nail when it comes to the parable of the monkey's paw, just the monkey's paw specifically. Because usually the whole point of that is it's supposed to be a tragic tale, and the character's supposed to learn something. Okay, and they're also supposed to suffer as a result of this. My problem is I've thought this through a little bit, and what bugs me. Subjective, it may not bug you, that's fine, is Drew got super rich. He's putting his kids through college. He's driving that new car at the end, selling the home. Like no big tragedy befell him besides his friend Al and his wife died, which I don't even know how much that affected him. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know to what level it is, but he didn't really suffer too much. He became rich off of it in a sense where I feel like something that would have made it more successful for me to have like the catharsis of this guy did something evil. He agreed to murder someone and just kind of got away with it. I would need some catharsis of something bad happening to him to purge away that more questionable morality. I think it does come to the frog and the scorpion parable, like you said. Some people will do whatever it takes to succeed, but this is a fictional story. And that just doesn't sit with me well. For me personally, I didn't like that he didn't have any retribution for that. I feel like maybe he should have burned the manuscript at the end, or something to kind of been screwed over by the deal. Otherwise, he just got what he wanted, right? He got the deal, and the guy died that he agreed to. That doesn't seem like a Faustian screw over deal to me at all. So I just didn't like the way he brought up Monkey's Paw and then flipped it. It just didn't work for me personally from a catharsis standpoint.
I understand that. I feel like that this is just a kind of fun little jaunt on that, where he still gets a little bit screwed over because he loses, his department head, but also the lady died too. And that's kind of the extra little stab in the back. And while in the story, maybe we don't see the ramifications of that for Drew directly, he says he'll never write again, and if you just wrote a book that's worth $400,000, your publisher or your whatever person he has in contact with that publishing house is probably going to want you to write another book. I mean, when you write that successful of a book, they're going to want something more from you, and you'll be like, no, I'm done. And they're going to hound you and stuff. And so
that sounds horrible. Oh my gosh, poor Drew.
Well, he didn't get his total upcomings, but
exactly.
I mean, but what was supposed to happen happened, and you didn't like that. You wanted him to get screwed over even more.
Well, that's the point of the monkey's tale. That's how that structure works, and that's how catharsis works. Otherwise, this guy is now a murderer and is rich.
Yeah, but I don't think that the entire point of the story. It's not.
No, it's
more.
This is definitely more on the campy side. Like this felt more like this. If Stephen King was a no name and he's trying to get published, this isn't the story he would have went to the publisher with to be like, you got to check this out. It's all rad. You'll like it.
Yeah. I know that there's no connection between all the stories, but we didn't read 3, and none of these stories are particularly awful at any regard. I mean, in the first story, Harrigan's phone, the kid gets rich, and it's great. Life of Chuck, he realizes the value of life, and he had all these great experiences and connectivity between people. The third story is called If It Bleeds, so that one might be pretty dark, and you may like that one better. And I feel like this one is kind of in the same venue of the first 2 stories that we've already covered. So I don't think it was supposed to be something that was, in that realm of the monkey's paw and some of our traditional horror Stephen King novels have, where the bad guy sort of wins.
Well, it has nothing to do with that, though. That's nothing that... I just want to make sure, like what you said, I want to make sure aren't words that were put into my mouth, because what you just said has nothing to do with what I said. What I said was that it had nothing to do with the horror, had nothing to do with the bad guy or someone getting screwed over. It has everything to do with the morals being lauded and no catharsis happening for what is ultimately an evil act of selling out to achieve something.
I think it brings back to my other point, is Owl's going to die anyway. Is it okay to sacrifice him? And you said the wife doesn't matter, so you can't put it on that. So it's all just Al.
No, from a fiction. So I don't know if you're asking me from a real life or fictional standpoint. From a fictional standpoint, the wife doesn't matter because we never met her. We don't know anything about her. Like, I don't care about her in this story, so it really didn't matter to me that she died. Also, I also don't care too much about Drew because this wasn't really a character piece. He was having too much fun, I feel like, with the word play and kind of showing the struggles that writers go through. That this is much different for me than the first and second story, because this wasn't a character piece. This was
Agreed.
This was kind of
plot driven, totally.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into ratings. What are you going to give this one?
I'm going to give it a solid 7. I liked it. Okay. I had fun with it.
That's the same rating that you gave the second one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they've all been solid for me.
Okay. I think I'm just on a different page of expectations. It's just a subjective rating. If you liked it, great. I'm giving it like a 3 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You did not like this. Right, that's fair.
There's nothing there for me. Just for me. So, with that, we do need to follow back now that I've finished Outsiders. Have you finished Outsiders yet? Or The Outsider?
No.
Is it single?
The Outsider, no.
Okay. All right.
Singular, Outsider.
You need to finish it so that we can go back and do If It Bleeds and get that up here pretty soon. So
I will, partner.
That'll be all right with me.
All right.
All right with me.
All right. All right with you.
All right.
All right.
But seriously, I think part of it is that line too. It felt like those B-line movies, like the Chopping Mall, where everyone's dying for a sale, or you lose an arm and a leg at this mall. Like,
I don't want to attack you personally, but I felt you kind of forgot how the different levels that King writes.
Yeah.
Not every one of these is going to be Shawshank Redemption or some of the others that we've seen. I think this is a nod back to his old days of writing B horror campy stuff. Yeah. He did that back in the day. Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of his stories out that are like that.
He definitely pulled off the B rating for me. All right, now that everyone hates me for, oh my gosh, I didn't like a Stephen King song, short story, oh my gosh. All right, guys, please consider subscribing. We will be following up with If It Bleeds and checking out some more of Stephen King work in the future. I do like him. This one just didn't hit home for me. Una out.
Peace.